And Mrs. Snaven didn't help. All during the last 2 hours of the day, she kept asking me to remind her how to do different things on the computer or to go over and help this kid and then help that kid. And the worst part was that nobody really needed help and they didn't want help, especially from the teacher's pet. And Mrs. Snaven came and watched me when it was my turn to use a computer. And she said, "It's so wonderful to see a real expert use this math program. I thought the day would never end, but it did. When I finally ran outside to wait for my bus, I was in pretty bad mood. And when I was standing in line, a fifth grade boy went by and said, "Hey, garbage guy, I think Mrs. Carp is in love with you." And then all his friends laughed and another kid said, "Yeah, garbage guy, maybe you can clean up my lunch table tomorrow and do a good job because you don't want to make the principal unhappy." But bus number 3 came and I got on. I sat on the outside edge of a seat, so no one could see with me. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just sat there, staring at the dirty black floor. All around me, kids were talking and joking, yelling and laughing. Not me. I felt terrible. It was fair. I didn't want to be a teacher's pet. I didn't try to get anybody's attention. It wasn't my fault. I felt like I was trapped. I looked up and my stop was next. When the bus stopped, I jumped up and got to the front of the bus. I wanted to be the first one off. I wanted to be the first one off. I was ready for this day to be over. It was real noisy, and the lady driving the bus turned around in her seat and shouted, "Quiet!" When everybody stopped yelling and talking, the driver looked around and said, "You kids have got settled down. It's not safe to drive when it gets so loud and crazy. You should all be sitting still in your seats, and if you talk at all, you talk quietly, understand? On this whole bus, only one kid has been a good bus rider today, and that's his kid right here." And with all the kids on the bus watching her, the bus driver reached over and patted me on the head. When I got home that afternoon, I walked right up to my room. I didn't even get a snack. That's how come my room followed me. She came into my room and said, "Jake, is everything all right?" I didn't know how to explain, because if I said to her, "All of my teachers and even the principal all think I'm wonderful," then my mom would say something like, "Well, you are wonderful, Jake," because that's what moms do. So I said, "I'm okay, Mom. I just got kind of tired of school today," which was true. Having every kid in the school think you're trying to be the teacher's pet makes you tired, and being whooped 6 or 7 times by a dodgeball doesn't help either. But afternoon dinner, we got to watch this really good TV show about the Coast Guard, and so I stopped thinking about school and I felt better. After Dad read a chapter of our book at bedtime, and after he tucked me in and kissed me good night and turned out my light. I couldn't help thinking about school again. The way I finally got to sleep was by telling myself it was probably just a bad Monday. I told myself that tomorrow everything would go back to normal tomorrow. I would just be a regular kid again. That's what I told myself, and I hoped it would be true. I wanted it to be true. I needed it to be true. And I went to sleep believing it. Tuesday bus ride to school was great. I was just a kid, not too loud, not too quiet. The bus driver didn't even notice I was there. And no one said a word about anything that had happened on Monday. And I said to myself, see, nothing to worry about. But I spoke too soon. The second I walked into her room, Mrs. Navin said, "Oh, good, you're here, Jake. I don't know how I'll ever survive another day without my special computer helper." Then she pointed at her computer screen and said, "I've got that math program open, and I'm afraid it's all muddled again. Will you come over here and see if I've done it right?" She hadn't done it right, so I had to fix it for her. And when I was done, Mrs. Navin said, "Jake, you've saved my life again." By that time, almost all the other kids were in the classroom. I could feel them looking at me, and I could tell they were thinking, "There's the teacher's pet, already hard at work." And it really looked that way, because who did Mrs. Navin pick to take the attendance period? Attendance sheet down to the office? Me. And during reading period, who did Mrs. Navin call on first to read out loud? Me. And who did Mrs. Navin choose to be first in line to go in assembly in the auditorium? Me. Everyone had been looking forward to that assembly for a while. It was this lady who called herself Miss Thumbelina, the storyteller. She had performed at our school before, and she was great. She told stories, but she didn't just read them. She acted out all the parts all by herself. She had a bunch of different costumes and hats and beards and wigs and huge baskets full of things like swords and ropes and lanterns. If there was a castle in a story, then she'd pull a chunk of a castle wall out of a basket and make you believe the whole castle was right here. I was glad Mrs. Thumbelina was performing last Tuesday. It was only 10:30, but already I needed a break. I wanted to sit in a huge room in the middle of all kids from grades 3, 4, and 5. Then the auditorium would get dark, and I could disappear into the crowd and enjoy the show. Miss Thumbelina came onto the stage, and we all started clapping. She had on this wig with long red hair. She made a low bow, and then she said, "Good morning. I'm going to start our program today with an old story. To help me tell this story, I need a helper. Someone who's loyal and true and honest and good. A real knight in shining armor." And then she held one hand up to her forehead to shade her eyes from the bright lights. And with her other hand she pointed out into the audience. And she pointed at a fourth grader sitting right in front of me. "You there," she said. "You look like a prince to me. Come on up on stage and help me tell this tale." The kid started to shake his head now, and I felt sorry for him. Suddenly, Mrs. Naven was there next to me. She said, "Jake, you're the perfect one to help her." And she said it way too loud. She grabbed me by the arm and pulled me up out of my seat. When Miss Thumbelina saw me standing up, she clapped her hands and said, "Great, here's come our prince." 15 seconds later, I was walking across the stage, blinking like crazy and trying not to trip on the stuff that was everywhere. There's no way to get ready for the worst 10 minutes of your life. 1 minute I was sitting in the dark enjoying the show, and the next minute I was the show. And this lady in a big wig was sticking a knight's helmet on my head and strapping plastic armor around my chest. Then she handed me a long sword, which would have been fun to mess with if 400 kids hadn't been laughing at me.